This is a very different era, and we're in a totally different platform of work and technology. Before, you could afford to wait and pay a vendor to figure out how to innovate on your time and your dollar. But this is a different era. If you are not working with an AI native company with a visionary founder who has really thought about your industry and your workflows deeply, what you're doing is not only delaying the progress within a particular function. This is not just like an OpEx thing. This is a CapEx thing. This is actually your missed opportunity to rethink what resourcing means for your company. Like you're taking yourself away from the strategic and competitive advantage of sort of rethinking your resourcing and your operational models.
Welcome to Pioneers, the show where we explore the intersection between humanity and AI. I'm your host, Ankar Patel. Over the last 10 years, I've built 3 AI startups, written 2 books about the subject, and I run a weekly AI newsletter. I also regularly teach and speak about the topic at conferences. This technology has grown faster than I think any of us could have imagined, and it's making us ask really important questions, such as how ethical is AI? What will this technology look like in a few years, let alone a few months? And most importantly, does it have the power to truly change the world? And what does it mean for you? On this show, I'll be interviewing the founders, operators, and pioneers that are introducing AI into their companies and industries. We'll be asking them the really heavy-hitting questions that make them dig deep into the core of what we do. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to Pioneers. Today we're diving into something that we see every day in our work with insurance and finance companies: how enterprises are actually adopting AI, what's holding them back, and most importantly, how AI agents can help them break through these barriers. To help unpack all of this, I'm joined by our Chief of Field, Suzanne, who spends every day working with leading insurance and financial services enterprises, helping understand AI for their companies and teams. And of course, we're going to talk about how Agent Flow is designed to solve the exact problems these enterprises are facing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So before we get going, for those in the audience that don't know you, could you just share a little bit about your own background and then also what you do at Multimodal?
Absolutely. So, to unpack my career in 3 chapters, I started my career as an enterprise analyst. So, think biggest companies, crunching numbers, Excel jockey, whole 9 yards. Actually left so they wouldn't become a whistleblower on data quality. From being an analyst, I moved to customer success, or the very beginning of that, for startups, frontier tech. Then I moved into the world of general management for scale ups. So think, hey, you've got a great idea, you need to take it to the next level, and you need someone to own the business end to end. And today I am a founder for founders, namely for you. I invented a role called Chief of Field based on the idea that technical founders love to build products, have to build companies, but have limited capacity to engage with the enterprise leaders that help move the business forward and give meaning to the agentic AI space.
Great. So let's jump right into it. You're definitely
Mhm.
on the front lines talking to enterprises every day. What's the real story behind AI adoption in insurance and finance right now?
Well, let's take a step back to last year. So, last year was the year of what they call off the record pilotitis. Everyone was trying to figure out the technology. Everyone was trying to figure out roles and responsibilities. Everyone was trying to figure out budget. Everyone was trying to figure out how to make sense of the opportunity overall. What that led to is our enterprise clients experiencing maybe 400 different companies all proving to make things better, faster, cheaper, and not being able to discern the difference that easily. So, what they did is they got budget allocated to first and foremost work with the large vendors, let's say the hyperscalers and their networks or other big tech companies, to first give that a try, not only using the solutions that they had prepared, but also trying to see if they could build these tools internally with their existing resources. So, for the last year, people have just been trying to make sense of it, whether they're building it or whether they're trying to figure out how to buy it. Now, fast forward to 2025, we are now in a situation where the pilot purgatory is seeming to dissipate. Yes, only about 12% of these pilots have converted to in production agents, but it is moving forward. How you know it's moving forward? Because instead of just a pilot, they're starting to move forward with more complex RFPs and evaluate, say, a company like Multimodal against some of the bigger companies.
Let's talk a little bit about that past year then. So they went with internal experimentation, maybe with their incumbent set of vendors, like perhaps from hyperscalers or their incumbent vendors that are
Mhm.
introducing agentic capabilities. What were the major learnings of what was maybe perhaps easy to do versus hard to do with all of that internal experimentation?
I think what was easy to do was getting their engineering teams to go play around and figure it out. I think it was really easy to be able to convince an engineering team, hey, like you get the chance to develop these skills and embrace a frontier technology and lead the organization into the future. That was really easy. It was also really easy to connect those people with the big tech companies that have already been embedded for a long time to sell them what they have on the shelf or basically get them to invest in some form of their own R&D. So for example, the relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI was extremely valuable because almost
Mhm.
all enterprises are on Azure, and therefore a lot of them got access to OpenAI's API, amongst others. So that's just kind of an example of, sort of that wall that was built around at least the team. And so we had much more of a bottom up approach than usual. Yes, they were focused on solving the internal business owners' needs and they were trying to service them similar to like how RPA teams would do that before. But a lot of it was trying to figure out what this technology is and what's needed to even be able to consider buying it. And a lot of this was done gratis, or this was done at like a very steep discount from the hyperscalers, again, the big tech companies that they already have relationships with.
Yeah, I think the Azure, like Microsoft Azure partnering with OpenAI was huge in solidifying
Mhm.
Microsoft's stance. And I think most companies started with the Azure OpenAI implementation. I'm sure they've broadened their reach based on what we've seen and heard. But, I think a year ago, AI agents, while that was still a term that was maybe around. It wasn't really top of mind, not until about September, so last fall. And I think what people were mostly working on, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were building like chatbot like experiences. So trying to bring in a ChatGPT like experience, but for enterprise workloads. So having like a RAG implementation for X number of use cases. I'm curious, is that what you heard and have seen? Which of those have moved into production? If we just get a temperature in the room around that.
Absolutely. I think if we take a step back again, I think what happened was is where do we have sort of the biggest costs in the company, or where do we know that we have operational bottlenecks and how can we solve these? So the obvious thing was like, okay, let's figure out what's happening on the engineering team. So the engineering teams are building things, by engineers for engineers. So they're trying to figure out how to use these agents to be able to automate some of their development tasks. Maybe that's has to do with cleaning up data or, pre-writing code, things of that sort. The next level was trying to figure out how to use this internally. There's chatbots and other types of systems there, but they didn't want to put anything in front of a customer until it was like 200% bulletproof. And
Mhm.
dare I say, I don't think many have anything close to that right now.
Yep.
So the second thing was like, hey, how can we help boost the efficiency of our internal employees? So they were building something similar to what Copilot looks like, a very horizontal, lightweight system for kind of sales and marketing tasks. And then Copilot launched, or in addition to Copilot, they were starting to use this to test this out with what I hear very mixed results. This year, however, they're starting to embrace the idea of AI augmentation or agentic process automation, which is very different than just like pure agency, right? It's controlled, it's monitored, it's constantly enriched, just like you would like a frontline employee.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you think about agentic process automation and kind of where the markets move towards like having agency performing actions, enterprise finance and insurance do not want like an open-ended AI agent to do all these things, right? So you've seen that with like Manus and others built for more consumer use cases where you want that ability for the AI agent to take on a number of steps and like get work done. And the end user doesn't really care how it was done. They just want the result. That is
Yep.
very scary, it feels like, for enterprise. I'm curious, like, how much are they embracing agency on behalf of AI alongside people for especially the critical work that gets done within finance and insurance?
I mean, this is my favorite conversation to have. Number one, even people who you would think would be very deep on the science and application of AI agents are not aligned. Like they all have kind of different points of view. I mean, for example, like if you ask the experts in the foremost experts in the world on AGI, like what AGI is, or the people building AGI, they all have a definition. The same confusion exists around like agentic AI within a regulated industry. On one hand, they're like, yeah, an agent who can just go around and do whatever they need to do to get the work done. Cool. However, people can't even do that within a regulated industry. When you go into an enterprise, there is actually no person that can just go have complete agency and do whatever needs to be get done to get from one point of a workflow to another. And within something like a KYC workflow, there could be 100 different steps within that workflow. So what you're actually seeing is sort of the next evolution, a smarter, more efficient, more augmentative solution to RPA, which is, APA or agentic process automation. So
Mhm.
it has I guess the fundamentals are like the heart of what RPA tried to accomplish, but with the reasoning and the human-like capabilities of agentic AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that makes a lot of sense, and I think going back to what you were saying earlier, this isn't so much end user customer facing; it's more for internal enablement.
Yeah.
And so, expanding on like where maybe RPA left off, I think is the real opportunity. From your perspective, I mean, there was just talk about existing players and vendors in space like RPA vendors like a UiPath or Automation Anywhere building now agentic capabilities. And in some ways, they have to because the market is putting pressure on them to kind of evolve their capability to stay relevant. How much are enterprises going with maybe existing RPA solutions that they have to see what could they deliver on the agentic side? What's working, what's not there.
A lot. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but this is a very different era and we're in a totally different platform of work and technology. Before, you could afford to wait and pay a vendor to figure out how to innovate on your time and your dollar. Like you could do that. You could be like, great, like take 2 years to figure out how to compete with the startups in this space. No, no problem there. But this is a different era. If you are not working with an AI native company with a visionary founder who has really thought about your industry and your workflows deeply, what you're doing is not only delaying the progress within a particular function. This is not just like an OpEx thing. This is a CapEx thing. This is actually your missed opportunity to rethink what resourcing means for your company. Like you're taking yourself away from the strategic and competitive advantage of sort of rethinking your resourcing and your operational models.
Yeah, it's very interesting the kind of FOMO aspect that enterprise has around AI, where
Mhm.
historically they would have waited for the technology to emerge, they would have been wait and see, it would have taken years. And yes, enterprise does have a maybe somewhat methodical and somewhat slow process compared to other segments, particularly the enterprise and regulated space. But this is pretty fast for enterprise, and I think they're seriously taking a look at potentially missing out. Like the fear of missing out is real, right? And I think they're much more open now than a year ago to say like, what is their best option? Are the incumbents truly the better option, or are there like native players that they should give a shot? And I think a lot of native players, I mean, we see this firsthand, are getting a shot at the table far sooner than in previous like adoption cycles for new technology. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thing that we're seeing firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's more off the record conversations, but I can't tell you how many enterprise leaders I talk to who just are tired of getting ripped off. They're like, I'm paying a ton more money to get less because something feels safe. And what they really are doing is basically, again, paying for the R&D of these established vendors. who did not take the risk on their side to innovate or basically disrupt themselves to better serve their customers for the future. And, they had a choice, right? It's not like, the RPA vendors or these like larger automation players didn't see agentic AI coming. It was just really hard to turn the ship around. But that was a strategic decision. It's a strategic decision to not turn the ship around. And you've seen large enterprises turn the ship around. Look what Microsoft did. Look what AWS has done. Like, there is evidence that this exists. However, again, I think it's a bit unfair and I think it's a bit unwelcomed, which is why I think startups are really having their moment right now to say, hey, we didn't think about this. So just give us a minute. Thanks for the relationship and thanks for not trying to force through your procurement process with another vendor and giving us the chance to catch up. Like, I just don't think that cuts it for most. Safe of yesterday is not safe of tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. It's forced a real rethink. So as we talk about enterprises now doing POCs and pilots externally, some with, let's say, incumbent vendors they may have that they want to try and test out agentic capabilities of, and then native players that are building. So startups are emerging here. What are the top few things that are really important to enterprise as they evaluate the set of vendors from one another?
Well, number one, safety first.
And what does that mean, safety?
Safety means, for example, is this cloud-based? Is this like SaaS of yesterday? Do they are going to have to like basically have data leave their four walls, right? Are they compliant? Are they SOC 2 or are they HIPAA compliant, for example, in healthcare, like really, really important. Like the other side of things is like, do they have employees and teams that can do this work on their infrastructure and like basically do forward deployment engineering, kind of like a Palantir model? That's, I think, what safety means.
So it's like first it's data security, security kind of component aspect there. And I guess you're saying the second thing is like de-risking the implementation, just given how important it is, right? Because enterprise isn't going to gut and replace generally what they have like across the board. They want to keep for example, claims, they want to keep their claims center or their underwriting workbench, or in finance, their loan origination system. So how do you play well with their existing set of tools and workbenches? I think that's pretty critical. So you're saying that the implementation to de-risk the opportunity is important to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's old news. Like any form of AI services is as valuable as the technology. And it's because usually on the receiving end for enterprises, it's not like they don't have smart, capable people, but those smart, capable people still need to upskill or reskill for agentic AI. And they might also be spread across like 14 other initiatives. So if you're going to bring in a new, highly viable, resource that's as, risky as bringing in a human, you need to have somebody watch them. You need to have somebody evolve them. And that is something that can only be done with the more sophisticated sort of next gen AI companies. And again, like the most popular one is usually Palantir, because Palantir basically goes and sits with government. Make sure that their software is embedded on their infrastructure safely and securely and continues to evolve from like mission critical work being done.
Yeah, Palantir is such an interesting story, right? Having been founded 2 decades ago, a little bit more now, they had a forward deployment model that was very hard for conventional like Silicon Valley and VCs to understand. There was a big component that was forward deployment software engineering. Like they invented the category and the term. And of course, like that was kind of a necessary thing to go and do business with all of the big 3-letter agencies in government. But they then built a phenomenal software platform that does require and still requires some forward deployment engineering. But they were able to build very sticky, robust software business that creates a lot of value in what would have been a very clunky space to operate in, which is the U.S. government. And they were one of the biggest beneficiaries in the last 2 years in the run up of like software companies that benefited from AI because they had such a great base of customers, and they were able to then work with that base to, the whole biz, like introduce more agentic and more AI capabilities to the base that they serve, which is primarily US government.
Exactly. And you think that the government is some sort of a laggard and they can't move. and, pursue opportunity, but then you see them working primarily with like the most innovative companies in the world where it really matters. And where does it really matter is this national security.
Mhm.
So, of course, or military, right? Which is, I guess, the same thing. It's the same thing actual with the adoption of AI and even agentic AI. Like cybersecurity is like, priority numero uno. I mean, 80% of organizations have invested in AI specifically around that. Like, it's just that is the number one thing, safety first. Like, you can't have fun or enjoy the benefits of anything else until you are safe and you are secure. And then you can.
Let's talk a little bit about the use cases and workflows in insurance and finance. So you mentioned sales and marketing. Maybe that's where a lot of companies started. I think still today, like there is a lot of activity there because people viewed LLMs as the ultimate content generation machine. But within finance and insurance, what other use cases, workflows, departments are you seeing more activity in now?
I think the most interesting one that comes up time and again that has the most to gain is underwriting. And it's not just because of the work, it's because of the people who are doing it. When we went to InsurTech this year, we were so ready to hear about the ROI of AI and the operational gains and, kind of the dollars and cents approach to, transforming a function. And what was so interesting was that the biggest concern of all of these insurance leaders, say like top 100, was that they had a graying workforce.
Mm.
And having a graying workforce doesn't just mean, bodies out, right? It actually means that you have no way of understanding and productizing the knowledge in people's heads and quote binders to be able to not only secure that within your institution, but to also train the next generation. So underwriters are like the sacred cows of these organizations. Yet we don't really know deeply across an entire function like what makes somebody an exceptional underwriter versus another. We haven't been able to sort of atomize and break down those processes and take away the drudgery and see really what their core zone of excellence is. So when you think about like the promise of agentic AI, I heard this at a Gartner conference actually. Agentic AI is what will help enterprises treat their employees like people. And
Mhm.
how they do that is they can actually take a look at, say, a best performer. They can atomize their work. They can take off the drudgery or the boring, rote, repetitive work, that gets in the way of the actual job. And then they can focus them on the high value, unique work that they want them to do and that they have to do for compliance purposes. And what that actually allows functions to do is actually get that information, not into some document or knowledge management system, but actively productized into a digital colleague.
Mhm.
And then what that actually allows you to do is basically provide that colleague to the entire team.
Yep.
Help you hands. And then suddenly you have a function that can be somewhat streamlined for the first time. It's another reason why doctors and hospitals have embraced AI agents and generative AI is because doctors were doing all this admin and busy work. And all of these doctors doctor differently. There's no like blueprint of how you become a doctor, right? Same thing with
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
underwriters. You're like an underwriter is like a unique art and science. And all you need to do is basically figure out how to hire the best of these minds and support them with these digital beings so that you basically get the most value. And it's also the best way to evaluate, like what your processes actually look like and how you could scale them or say change them, like given other changes in technology or workforce.
It's a really interesting thing you're pulling on, which is how do you capture the knowledge that real specialists have, like the underwriters, that belongs to them in their own head individually, but collectively, that's the institutional knowledge that the underwriting team at like X carrier has. It just
Yeah.
needs to be incorporated somehow so the masses, the entire underwriting team as a whole, could benefit from. And I
Yeah.
think that a really good use of agentic AI is to have the means for that AI to capture that institutional knowledge around how the underwriting team operates at that company, on that product, in that geography. And once incorporated well, and that's really pivotal, like how do you incorporate that specialized knowledge that the underwriters have? How do you incorporate that? But once you do, you can make that AI version available to the entire team to benefit from. And so you're basically making an AI that is available 24/7, that's basically bootstrapping every single underwriter to the level of the very best underwriters within that division.
Yeah. I mean, some people are less effective because they have to do a bunch of garbage work. I mean, most people don't even know what their job looks like without like robotic like admin. So most people don't even, like most leaders don't even understand the potential of their teams. And they've never had sort of a concerted, specific way to be able to get it out of their heads, which again seems to be the biggest concern, right? Is like they age out or they quit or leave in some way. And then how do you basically recruit new people into really bad tech and really,
Sure.
really stressful processes? I'm sure some people love it. There's something for everybody. But as a whole, like I don't think most people would want to do that.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about this, which I think is really important. Would love for the audience to hear about it. You've mentioned this demographic change that's happening, right? So basically, like the older generations are about to retire. They're the veterans. They know how to do underwriting best. And you're seeing a new cohort that's maybe coming online or perhaps not coming online at the pace that we need them. And so
Mhm.
there's like a big gap in the labor market around some of these core areas within insurance. Where do you see AI playing a role in that?
Well, I think, oh gosh. Well, first of all, you have to be able to find a way for succession planning at these organizations. They do this really well at the leadership level. Like, for example, like a CEO steps down and they need to bring on the new CEO, and they do a pretty good job there. But they don't do it within these core functions because it usually requires a new hire. And you're basically trusting that hire to come like 80% ready and then train on the last 20% of the company's data and processes. That's a lot of trust, and it's pretty slow. And there's also can be a pretty high churn rate if you don't do this right. So let's take the example that you have, your best performing underwriter who's about to retire. They've been doing it for 30 years. They know everything, right? You want that person to basically sit with every new potential 20 something hire who's interested in supporting the organization as a junior underwriter or an analyst. Like, do you really think that that is the best use of their time 1-to-1? Yes, for mentorship. But imagine that they could focus and basically train them on sort of the unique nuances of the business and also the function and also the industry. And then the young person or the next generation coming in wouldn't have to do that entry level grunt work. We're also seeing this in investment banking too, right? So think
Mhm.
about the conversations we've had on with some of the largest banks. They're like, we have these junior analysts that are putting together these pitch books, right? And they're basically copying and pasting and assembling information. That's a perfect use case for agents. Why would they do this? You want these young people, supporting leadership in other more meaningful ways and to be on phone with clients, building relationships, not only for their own personal development, but for the development and security of the firm. Like you want them to be able to build relationships that could last for the entirety of their, 30 plus year career going forward.
That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot more is possible. And maybe for the audience's sake, I'm very curious how you would think about an automation, right? Automation has been around forever. It's always been kind of an area to improve productivity and efficiency. Although I think you're saying that there are more gains from like the newer types of automation that are coming online. But what, why is this so dramatically different? Why is like AI or agentic AI so dramatically different from all of the other tooling around automation that's come out in the last like 5 to 10 years?
Because it's in our systems. Like if you are using I'd say useful agentic AI solution, it's going to be embedded within the workbenches or the systems that you already use. It's like someone snuck into your house and cleaned your floors. Like you just like somehow start your day at 9 a.m. and 30% of the stuff you had to do is done.
Mhm.
So, like, if you're a claims adjuster, for example, just imagine, like, with submissions, that the majority of it is like summarized and prepared, and all you have to do is kind of sign off. Like, what? What a way to go. Or you could spend that time engaging with your teams or
Yeah. So you're
externally.
saying you could take on more broad sweeping
Yeah.
activities that people used to do that get in the way of the real work that needs to get done, right? So it's much more enabling than what like maybe narrow tools would have accomplished in the past.
But it's also integrated. So that's another
Mhm.
big thing, right? Like most of what occurred with RPA or services, right? A lot of the work that agentic AI is going to do is work that is still being done by people at,
Mhm.
you know, banks and, insurance companies. Like and if it's done by people, it might not be being done by employees, but it's being done by somebody. Now, I've lost count of how many teams within these like core functions like claims or underwriting are augmented by offshore teams who do this work that's nearly impossible to measure and manage, that is technically expensive, cheaper than if their employees did it, but not that high quality, expensive to manage, and not really integrated. So there
Sure.
becomes a slowing or a breakdown in the process and the quality just because they're trying to save some money, right? But
Mhm.
now imagine that service was software. And that's why they call agentic AI for the most part services as a software, because you're basically having these digital colleagues do this work inside of the kitchen where all
Sure.
the meals are prepared.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So I think maybe tying it back to the first topic of conversation we had, a lot of enterprises have already tried implementing AI in some form. I realize the type of AI has shifted, perhaps from like more chatbot or Copilot experiences to something that's more agentic in nature. But you're saying the reality is most of them struggle to get real value from it. So they're stuck in some pilot or POC phase, maybe not getting into production. What are some of the key reasons companies don't get past the pilot phase?
It's kind of a lipstick on pig situation. Everyone was sort of rushing to adopt in their silos the way last generation SaaS worked, right? You can just like buy something, try something, and spin it up. You weren't actually bringing in a digital being to the company that
Yeah.
could add like serious 10x value, right? We talk about this in the startup side, right? Like you're like, oh my god, like the 10x engineer or like the 10x operator, right? Well, here you actually have something that can create this compounding, flywheel for your operations, but it's not just it's not yesterday's product that is another window to open. It's a totally different integrated data requiring being. One of my favorite thought leaders in this space is Sol Rashidi. She wrote the book The AI Survival Guide, and one of the things she talks about a lot is she says like basically without organizational maturity and readiness for what AI actually means, it's more like guesswork.
Mhm.
So she walks through like 5 different dimensions for being able to adopt AI meaningfully. Number 1, like how is your infrastructure? Like have you actually thought about this from the actual core and foundation? Can you handle it? Do you have the right systems in place? Are you too fragmented? Secondly, like how's your data? Like data is actually one of the biggest problems, and I'll touch on that later. But like most people don't understand how to prepare and identify their data for AI workloads. Like they haven't
Yeah.
even thought about it in that
Yeah.
way. They think, well, our data is prepared here, but not there. And also a lot of data based on human activity and human work doesn't never existed. Like the systems never captured it. The other thing is talent she talks about. Like, do you actually have the right people in the company? And also, do they have the capacity? There's this terrible stereotype that enterprise tech teams like don't have the capability. They might not in certain realms. Like, of course, like agentic AI is very specific. But the real thing is they're also spread across like 14 different areas, right? So they're just not focused on it. And you actually, again, like we talked about earlier, have to manage and hold these digital beings. The other thing that we talked about before was sort of like getting in out of the old guard or old world mindset, right? Of like wait and see. Like their risk tolerance has not caught up with the reality where there's a greater risk in waiting than pursuing. And also, like funding and budget doesn't really make sense. Like, I don't think people are understanding how to price this. I think they're pricing it kind of like, again, kind of the old world of SaaS versus like, hey, like for the cost of one employee, you like per year, you can have an agent that could do the work of maybe 10 employees or scale an entire team of maybe 30 operators.
I think it's a really great backdrop because I think we built Agent Flow to tackle some of those gaps, right? So I think instead of viewing the like work that people do in discrete tasks, which you had basically narrow point solutions for historically, I think it's very important to look at the nature of the work as a whole and orchestrate around the different tasks that need to get done. So, like underwriting, you mentioned some of that, right? The important thing is, can you read in the submissions that come through, understand what type of policy are they looking for a quote on, what are the documents that they submitted, what is the data in those documents, is it something that you should automatically deny because you just aren't in the business of underwriting that? Or if you have enough information, then can you then help the underwriter more quickly do the diligence to come to a decision, in which case you could provide some decision support, right? So all of those pieces around document processing, decision making, correspondence to the brokers and the policy, prospective policyholder, working with the underwriter, these can't be viewed in isolation. They have to be consistent and has to be orchestrated. Like the work has to be orchestrated across those channels. So we built Agent Flow to solve these exact issues. I'm curious, like based on what you're hearing with enterprises that are looking at Agent Flow today, what do they find really valuable from the conversations we're having so far?
I think what you're saying about orchestration and integration for this new workforce, it's really valuable. It's really funny when you talk about like, hey, why are you not adopting these new technologies? Or hey, like why is it so hard for, to get the data, for these, like AI POCs and pilots? And they all say the same thing. Oh, like we've got tech debt, we've got, data silos, we've got infrastructure silos, nothing works or talks to each other. And yet they're moving forward in the same direction with trying to buy AI solutions, right? They're like, oh, great, I'll just buy a couple of point solutions and then stitch them together again and call it a solution. Where I think what's so interesting about Agent Flow is that it's going that next level up. I was talking with an innovation leader from, Fortune 50 bank, and they were having a hard time understanding Agent Flow because, like, they're quite frankly, they weren't that well versed in agentic AI, period. And that's fine. Most people aren't. But what landed with them is that they're going to have to understand governance and orchestration for both their human workforce and their agentic workforce. And right now, there is a system that basically sits as middleware that allows you to design, build, and manage your human workforce. Amazing. What a system. And that could be external, right? That could be contractors, right? That could be offshore people if it comes through a vendor, or that could be your own dear employees. Now that exists, and that exists for a reason because it offers the visibility, control, or in governance to be able to manage, one of the highest risks, humans, delightful and valuable, but high risk. So, when Agent Flow comes about, right? People are like, great, are you just another, tool for helping with, claims or with underwriting, or like, is this kind of the same thing? Are you another bot? And it's like, well, actually, we've tried to think about this holistically, that this is going to be a fundamental shift in how you get work done. And I'll let you chime in from there, but the modularity and the orchestration and the sort of the higher level point of view of what this should look like within 5 years, I think is what adds more value to the enterprise.
I think that's right. I think historically people have viewed automation as a series of tools that they need to introduce, and then the tools are used in like very narrow ways. But humans are the ones that are doing the majority of the work. So now they have better tools to get work done. I think with AI, particularly agentic AI, it's a game changer, right? And I don't say that lightly. I think where we see things is that no work, even in enterprise, will get done without AI taking the first step, right?
Mhm.
So you'll never kind of try to do underwriting or claims processing without an agentic AI being there shepherding that process. And so what happens is that then the future of work looks like the following. You have agentic AI taking the first pass and then acting as the quarterback, shepherding the work that needs to get done. And agentic AI is not this monolith. There's going to be a series of AI agents, but a series of AI agents are going to do work as far along as possible. And then they may also work and input data into third-party workbenches. They may hit third-party APIs for things like deepfake detection or fraud detection or data enrichment, for underwriting purposes. But then they would also ping the human operators, the people that are managers and employees that like do underwriting, for example, or do claims adjudication. But the agentic AI piece is the one that's shepherding and orchestrating which tasks need to be farmed out to either AI agents or to human employees to get to the finish line. And so it's
Yeah.
much more agentic driven than ever before, maybe 50, 60, 70%. I think humans will always have some last mile agency for these complex workflows. And so I think delivering that experience is critical, but doing it in
Yes.
a way where you can trace what context did the AI agents use to get to the decision points. This is really important. The process documentation, the audit trails, conference scores to gauge when should you bring a human in or not. I think that's the piece, the change management piece that will be very important to solve for. And if you're
Mhm.
not thinking about it in that holistic way, then AI agents just become another tool, right? And it doesn't become this big enabling technology like it should be.
Yeah, and yeah, plus one of that, but I'll also say that it's not a set it and forget it type of thing,
Mhm.
right? Just like you would just not leave an employee like with full agency to just do whatever they need to do without any supervision or training or enrichment, right? It's like, hey, we have a new policy, we have this new thing, you got to stay up to date here. I need to be reskilled, upskilled. That's a constant thing that happens. I think like large enterprise, they have like what 2, 3, reorgs or restructuring a year sometimes. So think about how you have to bring employees along on the journey. Now you can't just do that with software. And in fact, even RPA, like you change one thing and
Mhm.
it all crashes and burns. Agents are a lot more agile and reasonable, pun intended, but you still have to be able to embrace them like an intelligent being or an intelligent resource, which is exciting. But the other side of it is that you're not just bringing in a technology to do this very concerted thing. This is the first time you have the opportunity to really rethink like what people should do and
Yeah.
why. Because you have all this human talent that you've only been able to access maybe, half of, maybe because they've been so distracted with other things. So like what happens to an organization if you take basically the drudgery away? What happens to a chef if he never has to chop an onion again?
Mhm. Yep.
Right? Like, what could they envision? Right? And back to the vision thing, I think Soul Rashidi is like so brilliant when she talks about like AI survival and AI strategy. But I think something she might agree with is there's a lot of lack of vision for this reason too, because unless executives from the top down really understand the potential of this technology and what it could do to sort of unlock new opportunities, it's very hard for them to have vision. And vision and strategy are very different things. I think why AI strategy crashed and burned for many in 2024 or earlier is because they had a strategy and it was kind of like an evolution of maybe what like RPA was,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah.
didn't have vision. And again, that takes a deeper understanding and hope
Yeah.
and application. So I think we're going to start to see leaders at the enterprise, potentially inspired by the AI native companies, to take transformation more seriously. Not only transforming what's done with technology, but what's done with people.
I think that's right. This is a step function change. It reminds me of what people started to do with when the web first came about, which is they tried to slap yellow pages in the physical form online, and they thought that was the best application. And we saw this with mobile as well. When you saw like smartphones like the iPhone come out, people thought, why not just have the desktop but rendered in a web form? People didn't imagine what mobile apps and how powerful they could be, and basically the user experience there, like unlocking newer
Yeah.
channels of engaging others online. And now you come to the world where a lot of Gen Z, for example, their experience is natively mobile. They don't look at, they might not even own a desktop or laptop. So I think you can't view agentic as an extension of what came before, like RPA. And I think you have to think about what does it unlock and how do you build with that in mind? Because it is going to be basically similar to having an AI employee that you need to train, provide feedback on, coach. And if you can't inject that institutional knowledge you have as an organization, as the way your team works, into that AI, you're going to have this missed opportunity to get AI that's specialized, that's an expert at what you do. So again, this is not something that you can just prompt your way to success, not at least for these complex workflows that we're talking about within finance and insurance. You have to be able to inject that knowledge in, but once done well, this is massively enabling because you have an AI digital colleague that's operating 24/7 alongside people. And that opens up a can of worms, which is what do people do? Where do they fit in? And there's definitely a place and purpose for them, but that's going to require some massive rethink as well.
Yeah. And also communication, right? Apparently, the unique capability is for humans to have compassion and communicate with each other. So, what an opportunity for leaders and, people on the front lines being able to negotiate with each other, like what should be done and why. I think I can't imagine a more exciting and meaningful time and work.
Yeah. Well, this was a great conversation. AI agents are transforming financial services, and it's clear that enterprises that adopt them now will be ahead of the curve. Thanks for sharing your insights, Suzanne.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Ankur.
Amazing. And if the audience here wants to learn more about how Agent Flow can transform your AI strategy, we'll drop a link to Agent Flow in the show notes. We'd love to help. And as always, stay tuned for more episodes of Pioneers.